audiobook narrator Mike Scott. When selecting your next audiobook, choose from some of the great titles narrated by audiobook narrator Mike Scott, like Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley Campaign of 1864. And if you're an author or publisher interested in having your written works produced as audiobooks, give Mike a shout at MikeScottVoice.com. Mike Scott, the voice of history. And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this Ask a Gettysburg guide. I'm Matt, your host. And today we are talking about Lee's wagon train of wounded. Lee's miserables, as I like to call it. His true miserables. Don't forget, though, before we get into this here, to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Make sure that you have your notifications turned on. And also, if you use Apple Podcast app, please leave a 5-star review. Reviews, liking, sharing, and subscribing are the best ways to help us grow our audience. All right, so today we're talking about the wounded, Lee's wounded, and their painful journey back into Virginia. And don't forget, folks, and I don't say this enough, I'm learning, you're learning. So let's learn together with our guest, licensed battlefield guide, Tracy Baer. Hello, Tracy.
Howdy, howdy, howdy.
Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
All right, so Lee's wagon train.
Yes.
Everybody's heard about this. 17 miles long, I think, right?
Give or take.
Give or take.
Yeah. We'll get into that.
Yeah, let's so get into it then. So the battle's over. The battle has ended.
Yes.
Okay. So go for it.
Well, I want to begin by just kind of giving a brief take on it. Why I suggested this as a topic. This is really, the more I dug into it, I find it's a story of pain and hope. It's a story of anger and compassion. It's a story of courage and surrender. It's a story of these men that Lee is trying to save. And as a kid, 50 years ago, I would be riding my bike on some of these roads. Mm-hmm. You know, I grew up 2 minutes from the little town of New Franklin that we're going to talk about a little later. And, of course, back then, I had no idea what happened on this route where I'm just riding my bike.
The world didn't exist before you were born,
well,
like
that's
every
right.
other kid.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And then when I was born, hey, you're welcome.
Hello, world.
But no. Then I heard about this, and it's one of those things about the battle, because it's something in my hometown. It's close to my home, that it was one of the first things I learned about.
Okay.
So as I get older and I start digging into it a little bit more, now I still ride my bike on those same roads, but they have so much more meaning.
Yeah, right.
And I want to start with a quote from Jacob Hoke, who was a merchant in Chambersburg at the time of the battle. And he would go on to write a pretty detailed account called The Great Invasion of the battle. And in that, he says, the vastness of this train and the aggregate of human agony it contained has never been understood by the country.
Can't be unless you see it.
Unless you see it.
Yeah.
And that's one of the tricks of teaching history. Whether you're a guide or a history teacher, anybody, you have to describe. You have to use your words, and you have to try to make people understand. And sometimes that's a big challenge.
It's very hard to do.
Yeah, it is.
Not everybody has the vocabulary to put someone mentally in a place that they're not in.
That's
and
right.
not everybody has
That's
the
right.
ability to put themselves.
That's right.
No matter what you do.
And so this wagon train, let's, as Glinda the Good Witch said, it's always best to start at the beginning.
Okay.
So let's start at the beginning of the wagon. Why was it needed?
Right.
Okay, why was it needed? Well, let's take a look. You mentioned about the battle's over. Okay, the armies are now facing each other from their respective ridges, seminary and cemetery. We need to understand that, look, this is the first big battle or the only real big battle with massive amounts of casualties that occurred in the North.
Right.
2 years these armies been battling one another. Where they've been? Pretty much in Virginia,
yeah.
Outside of Antietam in Maryland. And General Lee is no dummy. He understands that manpower in the South is a limited resource.
Mm-hmm. So he needs to save these guys.
He needs to save these guys.
Yeah.
For the first 2 years, for the first 13 months he's been in command with all these battles, he's been winning. He's been inheriting or taking that battlefield when the Union troops have gone.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really a rush for him
Right.
to gather up those men and send them in this massive wagon train. But now we have his men in the North plus massive amounts of casualties compared to other battles. And he knows that if he leaves them here, they're prisoners.
Right.
And he loses that manpower. Right?
Yeah.
And, these men are loyal to him. And he's going to be loyal to them.
Okay. Makes
Right?
sense.
Yeah,
Sure.
Yeah. And I was just thinking last night, what a difference a day makes. Because let's look at the evening of July 2nd.
Okay.
And, on many tours, I know I'm not the only guide that does it, but we emphasize those 10 roads. Just like the flag behind you there, those 10 roads.
Yep.
Right? By the evening of the 2nd, how many do the Union troops control?
The evening of the second one, isn't it?
Two.
Okay.
Tawnytown Road and Baltimore Pike.
Okay. Gotcha.
And just think how vital they are if they have to leave.
Yes.
Right?
Super vital.
Now, 24 hours later, it's a different story. It's the flip of the coin, right? Lee now has those two roads that are vital to his escape, the Hagerstown Road or the Fairfield Road and the Chambersburg Pike, right?
Okay.
So those roads that brought these armies here are now vital to get those armies off the field, particularly Lee. So the two roads, again, the Hagerstown Road and the Chambersburg Pike. The Hagerstown Road, he's going to take most of his army. Those miles and miles of supply wagons that Ewell has loaded up with his shopping spree here in Pennsylvania. Thousands of head of livestock, 4,000 or so Union prisoners. And here's where there's not the clearest when we refer to the wagon train of wounded. Most of Ewell's wounded go by Monterey, go through Fairfield over Monterey Pass. They're going with Ewell. Okay?
Okay.
Longstreet and Hill have to switch sides because Ewell is where? Well, he's on the left of the Confederate line where the Cashtown Road is, Cashtown Pike or the Chambersburg Pike. Longstreet and Hill in the middle and on the right, and they're really switching sides.
Why?
That's just the way it's going to work out. Ewell has the most supply wagons, so he needs to be protected, and he gets his men the shorter route. The shorter route to Williamsport, where Lee wants to cross the river, is by the Fairfield Road, up over Monterey Pass, down through Waynesboro, Hagerstown, etc.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's the shorter route. So Ewell is taking all his men that way. Longstreet and Hill are now flipping, and Lee has already, by the evening of the 3rd and the morning of the 4th, he's already put word out primarily to his medical director, Hunter McGuire, to start looking for wagons. Okay. Any ambulance that's available, he's put out the call to his commissary, his subsistence, his ammunition. You got empty wagons, send them up this way. And they're starting to load all of those hospitals behind the Confederate lines. Longstreet's men, Hill's men, and they're shipping them up along the Cashtown Pike, which is essentially from Seminary Ridge to Cashtown, the staging area for this wagon train.
So real quick, you mentioned before the supply wagons and cattle that Ewell has from his shopping spree, as you put it. So those weren't sent down into Virginia before, like as
some
they
of them were.
Okay,
Some of them were,
what
but
he had with him.
That's right. This is what is attacked, and I don't want to get into that that escape route, that retreat route. But remember, that's what Kilpatrick is going to be attacking at Monterey Pass. It's primarily Ewell's wagon train up there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So Lee is already put the call out for these wagons, and they're starting to load up the wounded. Essentially, whoever is not wounded too severely to hopefully endure this. And we're going to find out that perhaps some of those men should not have made that trip either. And it's gray area, just like, any number you can throw out about Gettysburg, the actual number of killed or wounded, that participated in a particular event. We don't know exactly how many were involved with this.
Sure.
Okay. But they are now starting to make their way towards the Cashtown Pike. Okay. So Lee is now going to need someone to oversee this trip. So he calls on Brigadier General John Imboden. John Imboden has been an acquaintance of Lee for some time. He's an independent command. He doesn't, he's part of the Confederate cavalry, but he's not directly under the command of Jeb Stuart. And near as I can tell, it's because, they just didn't like one another.
Right. Yeah, that's what I've always heard.
And Imboden is more or less, he's the next level up, I think, from like a Mosby.
Okay.
He's still kind of independent, but he's working under direct commands of General Lee.
Gotcha.
So Imboden is now, during the march north, Imboden is in western Maryland. He will be making his way up to western and south central Pennsylvania. Essentially what he's doing is covering the left flank of the Confederate forces as they move northward.
Okay.
All right.
So for people that are like, oh, well, if he's under the direct control of Lee, then Lee had cavalry, but he didn't have cavalry when he needed the cavalry, correct? And Imboden got here late. Yeah.
Imboden is, let me just give you a rundown of who he had with him.
Go ahead.
Imboden had a brigade of approximately 2,100 men, okay? He had his own 18th Virginia Cavalry under his brother, Colonel George Imboden. He had the 67th or 62nd Virginia Infantry, and this was a mounted infantry, under the command of his brother-in-law, Colonel George Hugh Smith. So this is a family affair.
Okay,
he has another brother who's a company commander in the 18th. He also had the Virginia Partisan Rangers under Captain John McNeil, and a 6-gun battery under Captain McClanahan.
Okay.
All right. So he does have some artillery with him. And they have been operating mostly in Virginia, western Maryland, south central and western Pennsylvania, disrupting the B&O Railroad, C&O Canal, any supplies that could try to make their way from western Maryland, western Pennsylvania towards the Union Army. And he's also keeping in check some of the Union troops around Cumberland. And if you remember, some of Milroy's men escaped out towards today's Bedford area.
Okay.
Everett.
Yep.
Everett area. Okay, so Imboden is summoned by Lee. A courier is going to reach him. He is now moving from Fulton County, McConnellsburg area towards Mercersburg, so he's heading eastward.
Okay.
And he receives this letter from Lee's courier to get to Chambersburg. So Imboden is going to go from Mercersburg to Greencastle. He's going to arrive in Greencastle on the 1st of July. Okay? So the battle's already started, and he's still over in the Cumberland Valley. But what he is supposed to do is go to Chambersburg to relieve George Pickett.
Right.
Pickett is the rear guard. So Pickett leaves Chambersburg, heads eastward. Imboden is in Chambersburg. He will eventually move eastward as well to guard essentially what's Route 30 today.
Okay.
And also the mountain passes at Cashtown, because he is now guarding a lot of those supplies that have been gathered in the Cumberland Valley. And on the night of the 2nd into the 3rd, he will be in the Cashtown Pass, guarding that pass, and he will make his way eventually towards Gettysburg, where, by his accounts, he has witnessed the cannonade and the repulsive pickets charge.
Oh, okay. All right.
So
he's getting there around the 3rd.
He's getting there, and he's understanding. He's aware that things aren't going so well.
Right.
Okay? So he makes his way back to his brigade, and the evening of somewhere around 10:30, 11 o'clock, the evening of the 3rd, another courier from General Lee shows up. And this one is telling him, you need to report to General Lee right now at his headquarters. So he and his, I think it's another brother-in-law, Lieutenant McPhail.
It really is like the whole family.
It is.
Yeah.
It is now. He and his staff officer, Lieutenant McPhail, are on their way to Seminary Ridge. They're going to arrive at Lee's headquarters. Lee is not there. He is informed that Lee is at Hill's headquarters. Mm-hmm. So he makes his way out towards the Emmanuel Pitzer farm out in that area where Hill is. They track him down, and Lee and Hill are in a tent, sitting on camp stools, looking at a map. So near as I can figure out, they're already planning this retreat.
Okay, yeah.
Okay?
Sounds like it.
Lee sees him, cordially says hi to him, and says, please go back to my headquarters. I'll be with you in a bit. So Imboden goes back to his headquarters, Lee's headquarters on Seminary Ridge, across from the Thompson house, because Imboden, in his memoirs, in his report, talks about all of the tents across from that little stone house.
Yeah.
And that's where he's waiting. And Lee is finally going to show up about 1 a.m. on the 4th. Okay? And Imboden gives a pretty good account of General Lee's condition. Lee rides up. He pauses there on Traveler. He slowly dismounts and slides out of the saddle. And he's standing there. And he kind of rests his arms across the saddle, puts his head down, and there's just quiet. And finally, General Imboden and says to Lee, General, it has been a hard day on you. And
to say the least.
Yeah, and Lee is finally going to say something, yes, it has been a sad, sad day to us.
Yeah.
And this is where he finally, after a few moments of quiet, he will say, we must get our men back to Virginia. And the reason he selected Imboden is that Imboden was in the area on that side of the army, and he's fresh. He has fresh troops, fresh men. The route Lee is going to give him essentially amounts to, you will take the wounded men across the Cashtown Pass, and after you get across there, it's up to your discretion to use whichever way seems to be the best to get to Williamsport, Maryland, where you cross the river. And it is imperative that you take these men. And he didn't, outline a whole lot there.
Sure.
And he said, I will give you written orders in the morning. And at that time, this meeting is coming to an end, and Imboden is going back to his command, and he's going to start getting things in order. He's starting to inform his men. Lee is going to give him additional artillery and some additional manpower to help protect this. And this is where it's a little interesting with the composition of this wagon train.
Okay.
Because it's not just wounded. Essentially how Imboden is going to form it is his men are going to be up front. The 18th Virginia, most of the 18th Virginia, at least 2 companies are going to be up front, and then they're going to be interspersed the whole length of it at every half a mile.
Okay.
Along with the 62nd, and bringing up the end is going to be 2 brigades from Stuart. Stuart is bringing up the end of this wagon train. Fitz Lee, and I think it's Lawrence Baker who took over for the wounded Wade Hampton.
Right.
Okay? So they are going to have men along with part of maybe Hart's battery with them at the end.
Now, is Stewart actually there? Or
I don't think so.
Okay, so these are Stewart's men.
No, yeah, because Stewart, remember, he is going to encounter Union cavalry, Kilpatrick, down to Smithsburg. So he's going that way.
So
and he's going to fight
way.
in Hagerstown.
So these guys are
Funkstown.
detached from Stuart
That's right.
to go and help
That's
Imboden.
right. Because it's it's Hill's wounded, it's Longstreet's wounded, and it's also Stuart's wounded.
Okay.
So also what they're taking are the baggage trains from Longstreet, baggage and quartermaster trains from Hill, and remember those 100 or so wagons that Stuart captured at Rockville?
Those two.
They're in there too.
Okay.
So it's not just wounded.
See, I always thought it was wounded, then the supply wagons and things. Like, are you saying that they're interspersed?
They are.
Oh, they are.
Stuart's at the end, but here's what I've been able to find out, the composition of this thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Baggage and supply wagons of the 1st and 3rd Corps. Ewell's wounded and wagons travel. We already went over that. Part of Longstreet's batteries were also there. Eshelman's Washington Artillery. Okay, they are going to be there to help. 5 guns from Heath are going to be there to help, and 3 guns from Captain Hart's Horse Artillery. Total of 22 guns. So let's see here. Where's my notes? Baggage. Okay, blah blah blah. What we have is essentially the lineup. 18th Virginia. The first wagons were Imboden's, his own quartermaster supply and ambulances. Okay. Following that were Hill's Corps, Generals Pender and Scales, severely wounded. They're going to be in some of the first wagons. And then comes Pender's wounded, along with his supply wagons and baggage wagons.
Okay.
Okay. Then comes Hill. Well, Hill is Pender. I'm sorry. Then comes Longstreet. So it's Pender, then Heath, then Longstreet's men come in, quartermaster wagons, followed by the wounded of Hood, and then Pickett's wounded, and then McClaw's wounded. And then captured livestock was herded with the division wagons from Longstreet, and then Stuart's wagons. So they're all kind of mixed up in there, but they're trying to keep them by corps and division.
Okay. Gotcha.
All right?
Okay.
So, we talk about the length of this thing, and it's not all wounded, but that doesn't make it any less severe.
Sure. So it's not 17 miles of wounded and then the baggage
That's
trains.
right.
It's the whole train.
That's right.
Wounded and everybody, 17 miles long.
Right. And that's
Aha.
and when you hear the 17, because if you would read Jacob Hoke, The Great Invasion, he's going to say it's between 25 and 30 miles long. So I think this is my own reasoning, for whatever that's worth. I think possibly when they're ready to go and they're first starting, it could be about 17 miles.
Okay.
But the longer you go,
The more strung out you get.
yeah, it's that rubbernecking thing.
Okay.
Okay. Now remember, on the 4th of July at noon, what happens? It starts to rain. Mm-hmm. You got this tremendous thunderstorm, and the wagons aren't ready. They're still getting these men in line. They're still organizing this. It's like organizing a big parade in the rain. It's like Macy's parade in the rain, right? Only a lot more people are crying. Mm-hmm. So finally, around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, they're going to start moving. And Imboden is going to be at the head of the column in Cashtown when they start to move. And they start to head out west. So I can't stress enough that up until this point, the roads are probably pretty good. Mm-hmm. And those first few wagons, they probably are making pretty decent time as they start out.
Right.
But the more it rains, and the more horses and men walking wounded, because it's not just wagons, it's walking wounded, the more horses and wagons and walking wounded and artillery are going to start tearing up those roads.
What kind of wagons are they using? Do they have proper ambulances?
Yeah, they have some. Yeah, they have some ambulances, and some of those ambulances, I'm not sure, if there's suspension and if there is, what it amounts to.
Right.
But a lot of them are not sprung wagons or spring wagons. A lot of them are just, bouncy. And, anybody that's driven today in 2021 on Pennsylvania roads knows what they're up against.
Yeah. They're not much better when they're paved.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Okay, so these guys, I mean, could it be that some of the wounded are in, just regular old buckboards or whatever they could get their hands on?
Well, Lee has, in his orders, has already, like I mentioned, they've sent 4 empty quartermaster wagons and subsistence wagons, ammunition wagons, which most of them are going to be covered.
Okay.
So, but yeah, a lot of them are going to be open because we have accounts of these men suffering with this rain driving down on them.
What are some of those accounts? Do you have any prepared, or do you have off the top of your head or anything? So the audience gets an idea of what a misery train this was.
Well, I tell you what, we're going to go by. Let's get into that a little bit later.
Sure.
As the train keeps moving, we're going to talk about a few of those accounts.
Go ahead.
Down the road.
Very good.
So this train gets going, and Imboden is going to stay there and watch a lot of it as they keep moving. And again, he is inserting cavalry approximately every half a mile and artillery every mile. And these are the guards for this train.
Okay.
And keep in mind, I want to put something in your mind right now. Those quartermaster wagons that's in part of this train, a lot of them have small arms and ammunition.
Okay.
Okay? So it's not, these men aren't necessarily that when they're wounded carrying rifles and weapons with them, but there are some
that they can grab
if necessary.
Yeah. Okay.
But the cavalry is there hopefully for that, to protect the train. That's Lee is very concerned that it's going to be attacked, and he tells Imboden, they probably won't attack you at night for fear of shooting their own men. But when it's light out and they can see, you will be harassed by the Union cavalry. So be prepared for that. So Imboden, as he's watching this train progress past him at Cashtown, he says this: scarcely one man in 100 had received adequate surgical aid, and many had been without food for 36 hours. So these guys, when you feel healthy and you go without food for 36 hours.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's tough.
But these guys are bleeding, been through all that stress.
Yeah. So Imboden is not going to wait for the very rear, but he will wait for a couple of hours as these men pass, and then he's going to start riding west to try to get to the front of the line. And he says this: for 4 hours I galloped along, passing to the front, and heard more of the horrors of war than I had witnessed from the Battle of Bull Run up until that day.
Wow.
So he's, it's dark, but his ears, he can't see these men too well, but he can hear the agony. He can hear the pain. He can hear the suffering. And he is riding for these 4 hours to try to get to the front of the line. So how long is that line? Well, we talked about it being about 17 miles. And then I think the longer you go, the more it stretches out. And I think maybe this is what Jacob Hoke is alluding to, because we do have accounts of the first lead elements of this train beginning to arrive in Williamsport, or in Greencastle, rather. I'm sorry, in Greencastle.
Okay.
And the end of it's just coming off the mountain, and that's more than 17 miles.
Yeah. It's just so hard to imagine all that.
It is.
And then when you throw in the sounds of the men suffering, and that's going on for miles too. You're probably hearing an echo from a mile away in a canyon somewhere or something, and in front of you. And
just think of throwing the storm into it with the lightning and the thunder. You watch a horror movie. Yeah, you watch a horror movie and you get these storms and the thunder crashing and the lightning flashing, and it just adds to that. It adds to that misery. And that's where a lot of these men are now really starting to break down. That noise and those flashes are getting to them psychologically.
Yeah, sure.
As well as that driving rain.
Yeah.
If you're a walking wounded and you're trudging along in this muck, in this mud, and the horse manure and anything else that's along the way, okay? And the wagon's getting bogged down in this. And you are yourself listening and hearing all this. Just imagine the psychological effect.
Oh, it would drive you crazy.
It is.
It's torture.
It is.
Is what it is.
And we have accounts, and I'm going to get to this, but there are accounts of these men just crying and screaming and begging for mercy. You know, let me off the side of the road. I'd rather take my chances.
With the Yankees?
Yeah. than be subjected to this torturous ride. Because every time this wagon would hit a rock or a pothole or something, it just sends that jolt up. And if you're not cared for.
Yeah, and if you've got like a broken bone that hasn't been taken care of yet, or an amputation, and it's just bouncing around, and God almighty, that's
and there's accounts of these men, before the rain started, lying in these wagons, and then after the rain is over, but their blood has essentially dried and glued them to the wagon.
Wow. Yeah.
So, trying to pull that loose, or glued their torn uniform or something.
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah. So it is just horrible, horrible. And we often hear of these horrible stories about the hospitals and things on the field.
Oh, on the field, yeah.
But now, this is, wow. It's just a horrible, horrible thing to consider.
That's amazing.
So,
so we were on
I'm thinking, if I'm considering how this line is going to be stretching out, probably after the first 10 to 12 hours, it is stretched out beyond 17 miles.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
I think it is.
Yeah.
I think it is.
It has to be.
Yeah.
It absolutely has to be. There's no way.
Because we know of separations. We know of men getting separated along the way.
Okay.
So you have to have a gap there somewhere where you can't see the people in front of you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So along the way, what happens?
Well, let's go over the route.
Okay.
Okay. So Imboden is going to take the men through the Cashtown Pass, which is the way, most of Lee's army came to this battlefield, up over the pass. And as they get down to the western base of South Mountain, undoubtedly they can still see and smell the smoldering remains of Thaddeus Stevens Ironworks there at Caledonia. And just another couple of miles beyond that to the west is a road that branches off. Today, it's 997, Route 997. There's a Rudders on the right.
Yep.
That's a little village of Greenwood.
Okay.
Okay?
Uh-huh.
And Imboden has selected that route rather than go west into Chambersburg. Chambersburg would be a longer route to go there. A lot of people just go there, turn left to go to Hagerstown.
He's cutting a corner, basically. Yeah. But he's cutting a corner.
He's cutting the corner.
To avoid having to go
to right.
Chambersburg.
And it's probably good he did, because by this time, Darius Couch is already for the Department of the Susquehanna trying to send men down the valley. There's not organized troops near yet in Chambersburg, but they are on making their way there. So Imboden is cutting the corner essentially, but the route he takes by Franklin County locals at that time say it's some of the oldest and worst roads in the county.
Okay.
So you start out on the Walnut Bottom Road, which turns into the Pine Stump Road, but a lot of people will. I've come across accounts where it's all considered the Pine Stump Road.
Okay.
But it is rough. It's narrow and it's old, and it's not a pike like we have here, like the Chambersburg pike. You're getting off that macadamized road onto dirt. Just
which is mud.
And it's getting worse. It's getting worse, and as the rain continues, and those horses and wheels continue to churn up that mud, horses are getting bogged down because they are working harder to pull the same amount of weight through the muck and the mud, and they're giving up, and they're just being left along the road. If you have a team of horses, some of the teamsters would cut those traces of the weak or even dead horse to keep his wagon moving with one fewer animal. Some of the axles are bogged down, so it's hard to keep the wagons going. So we have accounts of the men removing the fence rails along the road because there's wagons mucked down and they can't move, and they're going around them now.
Okay, so they're going into the fields.
They're into the fields too, which probably they may have made better time anyway, because it wouldn't be as muddy right away.
Right,
but
right.
Nevertheless, it's more damage on the infrastructure too for the civilians.
Sure.
So they
don't care about that.
No, they don't. They don't, because, and it's interesting because they are still foraging on the way back.
Oh, yeah.
They're still gathering up cattle and horses and anything else they can find.
Sure.
On this trip. The
walking wounded. Because they're kind of going by different routes now, right? They haven't been through here, have they? On the way up.
Early has, but he's going the other way with Ewell.
Okay.
Early, when he came to Gettysburg, he came up through Williamsport to Quincy to New Guilford, which is Duffield, and then from there to Greenwood is the only overlap where these men.
All right, so he did come up that road to get to 30.
Yeah,
basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
So they're now cutting the corner. Imboden's men will go down the Pine Stump Road to New Guilford. That's today's modern Duffield. Well, they will make another bend in the road there, heading towards New Franklin.
Okay.
Okay. So we start having accounts of some of the civilians in New Franklin. The first one, and the one I'm most familiar with, is a farmer by the name of Jacob Snyder. Mm-hmm. His home still stands. I know some people who live there. The barn, I remember when it still stood. It's not there anymore. They tore it down and put up some modern structures. But the house, the stone house, is still there. And Jacob Snyder, he and his wife and his son, Milton, they hear this. And I just want you to think for a moment about these people, 11 o'clock, midnight, something like that. They're trying to sleep. Mm. They probably aren't sleeping too well because they know there's a battle raging not far from their homes, on the other side of the mountain. Now the thunderstorm, the crash of thunder, it's probably rough sleeping.
Yeah.
And then you start to hear the sounds of these horses and the wagons, and then that unmistakable sound of the human suffering.
Yeah. God.
So Jacob comes out onto his front porch. It's raining, okay? And he lights a lantern. And I equate it with a summer's evening when you light your back porch light, and here come the insects, right? So he lit the lantern, and the Confederate wounded saw that, and they began to make their way there. The walking wounded men are now crying and trying to get out of the wagons, dragging themselves to the house, to the barn. Snyder says it was only minutes before his front hall and downstairs rooms were filled with wounded men begging and pleading for their wounds to be dressed and cleaned, and begging and pleading for water. Okay? Water everywhere, not a drop to drink in this storm.
Right.
These men are suffering, and now they're begging for mercy and help. And Snyder walks out to his barn, and he realizes there's men taking his cattle. So he shuts the gate and secures that so they're not taking any more cattle. But again, foraging going on while the other side of the Confederate forces are begging for mercy and help.
Right. Yeah.
So Snyder goes on to talk about his neighbor just slightly to the west, and this farm no longer stands. The field is wide open still, but the farm no longer stands. And this was the farm owned by Jeremiah George.
Okay.
And Jeremiah George leaves some accounts as well of Confederate dead being unloaded from the wagon train and buried in his front fields along the route.
Yeah.
Now think about trying to do that in the mud.
Right. Oh yeah, it's a total mess. So I was wondering about that. What would they do with the dead? They couldn't take them down with them.
I would imagine
they wouldn't.
Well, you have to remember, it's not everybody's alive when they leave. Mm-hmm. Everybody's alive when you get to Williamsport. They are dying along the way. Okay, and they are offloading some of the dead along the way. They may not be burying all of them, but we have accounts of them being buried at the George farm, and also wounded men going into the George property, into the George residence, the home, to be cared for as well.
Okay.
So they're looking for care. And again, like we mentioned, a lot of these wounded soldiers would rather take their luck, take their chances here trying to be cared for than try to endure this miserable trip down these rough roads.
Hell yeah.
And there's going to be quite a few of them dropped in the New Franklin area around the George farm, between the Georges and the Snyders. One of them was a man by the name of Colonel Benjamin Franklin Carter.
Okay.
Familiar with Colonel Carter?
It sounds familiar, but not off the top of my head.
4th Texas.
Okay.
He was severely wounded by shrapnel, making his way up to the Round Top.
All right.
Okay, so he is part of Longstreet's men. He's part of Hood's command, the Texas Brigade, and he is now. So we can get an idea where in the line it was, because Imboden's has already passed New Franklin, Hill's men have been next, and then it's Longstreet's, and then it's Stewart's. So
it's towards the end.
Yeah, we're 2/3 of the way through here.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, when Carter is left off there along with other men, and Colonel Carter.
Now, wait, when you say he's being left off there, is there a doctor with them, or is it just, hey, folks, can you take care of these guys?
Most of the doctors are just like the Union. You know, they took most of them with them, anticipating the next battle.
Right.
Well, the Confederates are leaving behind only those doctors and surgeons they can spare, and most of those are going to be at the hospitals.
Okay.
There's very little these doctors can do in a rolling wagon.
Right.
You know,
Sure.
in the night, in the rain. So most of them are being left off by their own free will, or if they are dead, get them out of the wagon, allow somebody else that's walking to ride.
Okay.
But Carter is one of these that's left off in New Franklin, along with a few others. And after the wagon train has passed, completely gone by, he will be cared for as best he can, and then they will be transported to Chambersburg. So in the King Street School, that's the one where he will end up. There's a couple of other buildings in Chambersburg that were set up as hospitals. And this is kind of ironic that he will be in the King Street School, because on the way north, when the Confederate forces occupied Chambersburg, Dr. Hunter McGuire had established a Confederate hospital for those sick Confederates and ill Confederates that couldn't keep up in the school. So he is now in that hospital along with other Confederates.
Okay.
So he will be cared for there. And he's got a neat story. You know, it's a small town. Chambersburg, 5,600 people, something like that, but small town. So word travels, you know. And the reverend, the pastor from the Zion Reformed Church, a man by the name of Reverend Samuel Fisher, he and his wife heard that Carter was in the school being cared for, and he was severely wounded. So this is one of those little neat human interest stories.
Okay. We like these.
Yeah. His wife's name was Naomi, and she had been previously married. I don't know what happened to her first husband, but she had a son to her first husband by the name of Mark Kearns, and he was a captain, and he was mortally wounded at 2nd Manassas near Chin Ridge.
Okay.
Okay? And who was he fighting? He was fighting the 4th Texas.
Okay.
Okay, so after this battle, he's wounded, and Colonel Carter, Lieutenant Colonel Carter, not sure if he was a colonel then or not, but Carter is going to come across Captain Kearns and try to comfort him. He understands that it's a mortal wound. And Kearns is going to pass away. He's going to succumb to those wounds. And Carter gives him his coat to be buried in. It sees to a proper burial. And then he sends word home to his parents, to Naomi, about, you know, this is who I am. This is what happened to your son. I'm sorry, you know, but we took care of him as best we could. We made him comfortable in his last hours. So Naomi, you know, she finds out Carter's now been wounded. Is it the same guy? Well, she needs to find out. And she goes, they find out it is the same man. It is the same Carter that took care of her son, and they asked for him to be transported to the Zion Church to be cared for. You know, taking a little better care, personal care.
Personal care, yeah.
Personal
returning
care.
the favor.
Yeah. Dr. Sensony is a local physician from Chambersburg, and he's laid it down for Carter, saying, "Look, this is mortal. I'm doing what I can for you." They must have had a good heart-to-heart.
Yeah.
Because Dr. Sensony then pleads with some of the local people to see that he gets a Christian burial when he does die, when Carter does pass. And none other than Alexander Kelly McClure from Chambersburg, who's, you know, a newspaper man, but he's also on the Board of Military Affairs for Governor Curtin.
Okay.
Okay. He assures Dr. Sensony and Carter that he will find a way to give him a proper burial. So Colonel Carter is going to pass on July 21st, and McClure is going from church to church in the town. And they're all saying, no, you can't bury him here. He's a Confederate. Finally, at the Methodist church, they said, yes, you can bury him here. It was buried there with a couple of other Confederates in an unmarked grave. Okay, and the years go by. The church is sold, or it changes congregation somehow. There's a new congregation in there, and they want to expand. So what do you do with these graves?
Move them.
You move them. So they were moved to Cedar Grove Cemetery in Chambersburg, which sits on a hill kind of to the northwest of the town. Cedar Grove is where many of the people from Chambersburg fled when the Confederates burned their town in 1864.
Okay.
Okay. So these remains are moved to Cedar Grove, but they don't know whose they are. Why? Because all those records were destroyed in the fire in 1864. So they're not sure who they are. Only in the last several years, a search has been underway to figure out where Carter was buried. And David Petruzzi, the author, has kind of narrowed it down. He did some searching and record hunting and things, and he thinks he found out where they were. And in recent years, a stone has been dedicated to Colonel Carter in Cedar Grove.
Oh, nice.
So yeah, he has been identified there.
How about the other two? Or a few?
Well, there are other Confederates we know of buried in Cedar Grove.
But we don't know who they are or where they are.
No.
Right.
All those records have been...
They're gone.
They've been lost.
So that's interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, it was kind of a neat story. It's almost like the Wadsworth story, you know, take care of somebody, and when you're ill, we recognize and take care.
Yeah, sure. It's just one of the weird things about war, though, is that, you know, you shoot the guy, or your men shoot the guy, and you come across him and you give him that good old-fashioned Christian kindness as he dies.
Right.
Well, why'd you shoot him in the first place?
Right,
Why are you doing this in the first place? It's so stupid.
It's a man thing, isn't it?
It is a man thing. It is. We just have to do it.
So most of those wagons, most of the wagon train are going to be passed through New Franklin by 9 a.m. on Monday.
Okay.
Okay, it's making its way. Now, if we jump back in the daylight, Gregg's cavalry, a couple of his units are going to be encountering, kind of following up the wagon train. They're going to be picking up stragglers along the way. So any wounded, Gregg is kind of picking up. He picks up over between 200 and 300 men, wounded men, stragglers from this wagon train that will be sent to hospitals and POW camps. He is not going to have a big role in actually attacking the wagon train. He will attack some of Stuart's men towards around Caledonia. This is J. Irvin Gregg, and he has the 16th PA and the 1st Maine Cav, and they're mostly just kind of following up and scouting.
Okay.
So the wagon train keeps going. At New Franklin, it goes straight through that little intersection, that little village, and they are going to be on the outskirts of the little town of Marion. Some of these roads follow pretty truly that route of 1863. Some of them, you can, if you know where to look, you can still see some of those road
See
beds.
the remnants of the roads?
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. By the night of the 4th and early into the 5th, a gap, one of these gaps in this wagon train has started to form that we talked about. And around New Franklin, it's a significant gap. And or not New Franklin, I'm sorry, Marion. And there's actually, as the road approaches Marion is more or less a group of houses along the US 11 today, along the Valley Turnpike. And there's a road that splits, and it kind of goes on each side, hitting 11 or the Valley Turnpike on each side of this row of houses. And I believe they broke off to the northern road, where they, on their way there, they encounter another local, a civilian, who is awakened by all of this commotion. And one of these teamsters says, "Is this the road to Williamsport?" And that quick thinking man said, "Yes, it is. But just ahead, there's an intersection. But you need to turn right at that intersection." Okay. Misleading them. So instead of turning south towards Greencastle and Williamsport, he's turning north towards Chambersburg. So this group of wagons that was separated is now heading northward. And they arrive on the outskirts of Chambersburg. And some of these men say, this doesn't look right. You know, we came this way to this battlefield, and this doesn't look like Greencastle. These steeples don't look the same. You know, these church spires. So they slowly make their way into town. And, you know, by this time it's light out. They can see, and it's just not adding up to them. And they realize as they enter the town and arrive on the square of Chambersburg, they've made a pretty bad mistake. Yeah. So they now are being surrounded, and of course they can't defend themselves.
This is on July.
This would be on the 5th.
The 5th. Okay.
Yeah. So they are now taken prisoners, and again taken to the King Street School. Jacob Hoke receives word of this, and he actually goes and helps unload the wounded and take them into the school. So about 40 wounded soldiers from Hood and McLaw's divisions ended up in Chambersburg as prisoners. But again, they're being cared for. So
they don't even really get out of Pennsylvania before they have to start dumping off, for lack of a better word. A good number, they're wounded.
Oh no, they're just on the other side of the mountain.
Yeah. And
this is one of those things, you know, we don't know how many men were trying to be taken. We don't know how many. We know approximately how many men were guarding the train, but we don't know how many wounded men, how many casualties were in that train. But even worse than that, we don't know how many never made it to Virginia.
Right.
We don't know how many. We talk about the entire Gettysburg battlefield being hallowed ground. You know, the Confederates not being started to be removed for 9 years after the battle. How many were lost to time? How many are on that route?
I was just thinking that.
You know,
there's got to be some in the woods.
When I ride my bike along there, I'm just thinking, how many?
When good
we'll never
rain
know.
And an arm bone is extending out of the ground.
We don't know.
There's
a lot of farmland and woods still along that route, and we just don't know.
And you probably, if they were in your care and one of them died, you buried them in your field, you're not going to mark it so that Union loyalists can come by and destroy the grave or something.
Well, here's what's interesting about that. Some of the officers, they have their servants with them. Right? And they're traveling with them. So if one of the officers dies, the servant very well could bury them. And maybe not mark the grave per se, but at least make notes as to say where it is. I can find it.
Right.
Because we do have accounts of the servants coming back years and years later and reclaiming the body, finding bodies. And
so even after slavery is over, and they're still coming back to get them.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
That's crazy.
No, I don't know how many instances there may have been.
But still, there's someone has done it. Yeah.
Yes. So the lead of the wagon train is starting to arrive in Greencastle. around 4 a.m. on Sunday. So this is the 5th of July.
Okay.
So it's starting to get light out. Reverend J.C. Smith of Greencastle says this: "It was an easy matter to trace their route of flight. Dead horses, broken down and abandoned wagons, cannons, carriages, and caissons. New-made graves were everywhere to be seen. It was simply a road covered with wrecks." Jeez. So, you can hear this. All those civilians along the route are hearing this the whole night.
Yeah.
Now that the light's up, wow, it takes on new meaning.
Right.
You can see a lot more
see the mess.
devastation.
Yes.
Yeah, the detritus of the battle. Again, how many wagons started this trip and how many actually made it to Williamsport? We'll never know. We'll never know. Greencastle, they were heavily abused on the trip up by the Confederates, taking things for the army, and there's a lot of animosity, if you will, between the civilians and the forces. And the Greencastle civilians, seeing these wounded men making the way south, they start razzing them a bit. Hey, you been to Philly already, have you? Oh, we're just on our way back to heal up these men, and we're going to come back and finish the job. And it's just a matter
Lots of shit talking.
Yeah, it was. A few of the civilians will help some of the soldiers. They'll take them some food out to the wagons. They'll take some water to them. So there is that Christian care. Mm-hmm. But that was the exception, not the rule.
Okay.
And some of the civilians, as these gaps are forming in this wagon train, these horses and cattle that have been rounded up, civilians are going out and they're cutting the halters and the harnesses and trying to lead them down the alleys. So they're taking their livestock back.
Yeah, good.
They're trying to take it back as best they can. So, it is a little bit of, well, heck, you took it from me. Mm-hmm. I'm taking from you.
Yeah. Good.
And then in Greencastle, a young cavalry officer by the name of Ulrich Dahlgren comes into play. Now, Dahlgren is the son of John Dahlgren. He's the chief ordnance officer of the Naval Department, something like that. Dahlgren is going to get more or less a political appointment.
Okay. And
he is actually assigned to Meade's staff, but he spends very little time in Gettysburg. He's more or less behind the lines. For some reason, Meade is allowing him to kind of roam behind the Confederate lines. And while the battle is going on, he's in Greencastle, and he and a group of his men capture a courier coming across Maryland into Pennsylvania on his way to Lee's headquarters. And they capture this courier, and his satchel has a letter addressed to Lee, and basically it says something to the effect of, it's from Richmond, don't expect any help. We don't have any more men to send you. Well, Dahlgren takes that to Meade. He arrives after the Council of War in the evening of July 2nd.
Okay.
So I don't know what effect this letter may have had, but Meade in the back of his mind knows, well, Lee's not getting any more help.
Right. No fresh troops.
No fresh troops are coming.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, he's got that going for him.
Okay, yeah.
So Dahlgren now, he's talking to Meade again. He says, well, look, I can maybe do a little bit more behind the lines. And Meade gives him permission to return, and he's going to go back with more men. He's going to secure some men. Let me see if I can find it here, because I can't remember who it was. He received permission actually from Pleasanton to take 15 men and run in the, that was the first one. I'm sorry. This is, down here we are. He has about 100 men from the 6th PA Cav. Okay. So he's going to take these men back to Greencastle, and what they are going to do is wait. He's got word of this wagon train, and they're actually going to attack the train in the town, pretty much right in the center square area. As the train is passing from north to south, Dahlgren's coming in from the east, and he's going to hit the train, and he's actually going to capture about 130 wagons, a couple of hundred wounded, and 2 cannons in the town. And he's trying to get these captured wagons and men and cannons through the town as quick as he can, but, you know, how fast can they move?
Right.
And the Confederate guard forces mount a counterattack, and they capture most of them and take them back. I think Dahlgren ended up taking maybe 30 prisoners to Waynesboro the following day. But, you know, needless to say, he may not have taken all of these men he initially captured, but he certainly disrupted that line,
Sure.
Gave the Confederates something more to think about, and slowed down the pace. Because a little bit later that day, just a little further south, as the train broke off of the Valley Turnpike onto the Greencastle Williamsport Road. Okay. A man had some land down there, a Greencastle resident by the name of Tom Pauling, Pawling. And he must have been a rowdy kind of guy. And he got a lot of these civilians banded together, and they attacked the train themselves. And they went after the wheels with axes, the spokes, and they started hacking and chopping it, and they dropped at least a dozen wagons by doing that, disrupting this thing. You know, it's kind of the hit and run thing, but, you know.
Hey, man, it's war.
It's war, right?
It's good for the goose, it's good for the gander.
So Tom Pauling is going to be responsible for disrupting that line as well, ambushing it.
So we're up to, what date are we up to now?
We're still on the 5th, which is a Sunday. Okay. And that wagon train keeps moving southward. There will be a few more hit-and-run tactics by Pauling and by Dahlgren, but they really don't amount to a great deal. The next real biggie is going to come at Cunningham's Crossroads, which is just across the Mason-Dixon line. Okay, that's at today's modern Searfoss. It's still just a little roundabout there, but this is where the next attack is going to be. And this is going to be taken by, or led by, men from the 1st New York Lincoln Cavalry and by some remnants of Milroy's men who have been making their way eastward. So if you didn't know, when Imboden left McConnellsburg and Mercersburg, making his way ultimately to Gettysburg.
Which are west of Chambersburg.
Yes, that's correct. Entering Mercersburg was a man by the name of John Singleton Mosby. And he was only there for a day. He was looking for Lee's army, didn't find him, so he turned around and left. Okay? But some of these men from Milroy and the 1st New York Lincoln Cav got wind of this, and they started moving towards Mercersburg. Well, then they got word in Mercersburg, while they were eating a lunch graciously supplied by the civilian population, hey, you guys know about this wagon train? Well, no, we didn't. Well, let me tell you about it. Okay, so they secured some guides, and it was commanded by Colonel Lewis Pierce, and he selected this team of men to attack this wagon train. So this team of men is going to be commanded by Captain Abram Jones. He was of the 1st New York Cav, and he will have elements, about 120 men from his own command and about 80 men from the 12th Pennsylvania. And they will be making their way from Mercersburg on a southeasterly course, arriving on the outskirts of Cunningham's Crossroads. And there's a ridge line just to the west running kind of parallel with the pike. And they take cover behind this ridge line. Undoubtedly, they can hear these wagons grinding along the road. And Jones and a few men kind of take their way up to the top of the ridge where they can see what's going on. And he has to think quick because he can see there's an element of those cavalrymen who just passed, the guards, you know, and he can see there's probably more to the north making their way. So he decides to split his command into 3 portions. Jones is going to lead a section straight down the road and strike the wagon train. And there's another section of his men that are going to go more towards the north and strike another section of it.
Okay.
And guard from the next element of the Confederate cavalry to protect it. And then the rest are going to stay on the ridge line on the road to Mercersburg as a reserve. So these men do that. They think quick, they divide their men, and they make this quick attack. So the Confederates don't know what hit them. They weren't expecting this.
Sure.
So they get hit. Jones is at the crossroads there, directing men towards Mercersburg. So these wagons and teamsters are now making their way, the walking wounded, all these men making their way up that road. The reserves back there over the ridge are now getting them. And you ever see the movie Patton?
Yeah, of course.
Remember when that intersection, that muddy intersection?
Yes, and he's directing traffic.
That's what I picture this like, directing this traffic, you know?
Yeah. He says, what does he says? You'd be a better traffic cop, or you'd make a good traffic cop, or something like that.
Omar Bradley said that.
Yeah.
Make a good traffic cop, George. But that's what came to mind when I pictured Jones there directing these wagons up to the west. The Confederates are now mounting a counterattack. So they're trying to get these wagons on the way as quickly as possible. And they're able to hold them off. They get, they're able to get 134 wagons, 600 and some change in horses and mules, 645 prisoners, and 2 cannons. So this was no small capture here, trying to get these men on the way to Mercersburg.
Sure.
So as they're making their way, Jones comes across, and this is great, Jones comes across a wagon whose driver had run off, okay? But he sees a young black man standing there and said, "Hey, can you drive that team?" And he replies, "Yes, massa, I drive them." Okay? So he jumps up on the wagon and he whips his team and gets them going. And he looks back at all these wounded Confederates that he's hauling in the back of the wagon. He says, "By golly, you toted me off. Now I tote you off."
Ah, nice. Yeah. That is a good one.
So they're making their way towards Mercersburg, and the rest of Jones's men are now coming together as a rear guard as the Confederates try to harass them and get these wagons back. And they can't do it. They can't do it. They don't want to stray too far from the main wagon train in case there's any other problems. But now these wagons are on the way to Mercersburg. They will be offloaded in Mercersburg, many of them taken to the seminary, which is now on the campus of Mercersburg Academy, where they're cared for by local doctors and physicians. Eventually, they will be moved. Some of men from Milroy and Darius Couch's men will transport them to other hospitals where they become POWs. So there is a pretty good hit taken there. They got, they got 600 and almost 650 prisoners at that one fell swoop.
Right.
And that wagon train keeps going. Okay. They're going to start arriving in Williamsport. And incidentally, it was successful from this standpoint, too. Jones only lost 3 men killed and 1 wounded in that whole attack.
Okay.
So that was pretty good for him.
Sure.
Williamsport, Maryland. The wagon train will start arriving there midday on July 5th. So you have to think they made pretty good time. They left Cashtown around 4 o'clock on the 4th.
Right.
So 24 hours later, they're in Williamsport.
They're there.
They're doing okay.
Yeah.
Lee gave him explicit instructions. Don't stop for anything. Keep moving. So these horses are being run into the ground, and who knows how many they've lost, but they kept moving, and they're starting to arrive in Williamsport. What does Imboden see when he arrives in Williamsport? Well, he sees a river that is now swollen because of all these severe rains, and he can't cross it. There's one ferry there. The fords are too high to cross where they crossed coming north. And there's only one ferry in use, and it's slow. My understanding is the ferry boat was more or less like a flat barge, maybe 50 feet long. You could put a 6-horse team and a wagon on it, maybe some men around it to get across, but it didn't have a huge capacity.
Not a double-decker thing like we're used to today.
No, that's, drive on, drive off.
Yeah.
What was that?
Josie Wales.
Josie Wales.
Yeah, there you go, like that.
A Missouri boat ride. So Imboden has a decision to make now. I mean, how do I get these men across the river? Well, I can't. So he more or less takes over the town of Williamsport.
Okay.
We talk about Gettysburg being not so much as a town as a collection of hospitals.
Right.
Williamsport had to be worse. It was a smaller town, and just about every building was now used as a hospital. So he starts offloading these wagons, and there are accounts that, as they start offloading them, they're offloading the dead that are in the wagons as well. And many of these dead, or soon to be, will be buried in Williamsport cemeteries. But houses and churches are taken over.
So it's a hospital town.
It is a hospital town, and he gives the civilian population orders. Start cooking for my men. Start cooking for the wounded. So they do. They start baking breads and other things, trying to feed the wounded. You know, this is a Maryland town. It's a border state. Most of the sympathies lie with the North, but they're still taking care of these men.
Sure.
You know.
I mean, you gotta.
You gotta. But
You can't look somebody in the face while they're suffering and say, F off.
Some people can, but you shouldn't.
Yeah, that's true.
But Imboden also knows his train has been attacked. He also knows Confederates, the rest of the army's on its way, but who knows when they're going to be there. He needs to prepare to defend Williamsport if that need arises. So some of these wagons, he is barricading these roads in. I think there's 5 roads in and out of Williamsport, and he starts using the wagons to barricade them. He starts putting patrols on some of these roads and putting his limited artillery out some of these roads.
Mm-hmm.
Just
and you are correct, it is 5.
These guarding these. But something else that he does is to this, if I'm not mistaken, to the south, towards Downsville, he sends wagons out on a foraging party. So he's still doing that. Yeah, he's still doing that.
Well, he was late to the party, so he wants to make up.
Well, yeah, he has been capturing some things, though. And the rest of the wagons loaded down with the supplies and things other than the wounded, he sends down along the river, across this narrow, rickety bridge that crosses the C&O Canal down to what we call the river bottom. So it's just the river's edge. Mm-hmm. And if you've been to Williamsport, there's a big power plant there now where these wagons would have been, right along the edge of the river. And I have to think that the water wasn't as high as it could have been if those wagons are down that low to the river.
Yeah. Right,
I've seen that river flood.
Yeah.
And it ain't pretty.
I bet.
But it mustn't have been so bad that they couldn't get all these wagons down there.
Yeah. Because I'm looking at the map in the Lano book, and it's got a whole bunch of them parked there right by the river.
Yeah, down at the river bottom, yep.
So they take a ferry across.
They start to slowly take a ferry across, and there are some supplies coming up from the south that they're not making it an empty return trip back across the river.
All right, okay.
Eventually, he will rig up another ferry, so they have 2 of them going.
Going both ways, so you don't have to, Yeah.
But now, what is he going to use? You know, he only has about 2,100 men in his command. Mm-hmm. So what is he going to use to help defend this area?
Artillery.
Well, he's going to start arming some of the walking wounded.
Oh, right.
Now, this is where those wagons I mentioned earlier come in. Those quartermaster wagons with the small arms.
Yeah.
This is what you're using.
Got it.
Okay, so they're going to start getting the Teamsters and the Wagoners and walking wounded out there. And
but how much does that swell his ranks, though?
About 500 men.
So
something like that.
I mean, still, I'm sure he's glad to have 500 men, but
fewer than 3,000 men.
Okay.
When you take into consideration Stuart's men that are traveling with him.
Right.
And he will be getting these men into place and playing that game of keep them out of sight and shuffle them around to make it look like you have more men than you really do. And coming in then from the Boonesboro Road is John Buford. And now his cavalry division is back to the full 3 brigades. Wesley Merritt is with him as well.
And he's got another battery, too.
He's got a battery. And
Graham.
Because Graham was attached to Merritt.
Right.
So Gamble, I believe, is going to be on the left, Merritt on the right, and Devon in reserve. Am I correct with that?
You are very correct.
Okay, so they are coming up. Califf will be taking a position and firing because from the high ground to the left side of the road, they can see the wagons along the river. So, that's a target-rich environment.
So Buford's men are on high ground, or what is the terrain like? I've never been down here, so what's the terrain like?
There's a low ridge in the town now. Okay. What would have then been just on the edge of the town, and that's where he is. And when Lee gets there, that ridge is going to the defensive line is going to be pushed out even further, and it's going to be Imboden's going to have this arc. It's not a fish hook. Okay,
no.
It's an arc.
Right.
Okay, and he's protecting those roads from that limited amount of high ground that he has.
Okay.
And as Buford comes up, they capture that wagon train that Imboden had out foraging. So they capture those men, but Buford is now beginning to attack, and Imboden is playing this game of shifting men around, using limited amounts of artillery because he's running low on ammunition. And just at the right time, few ammunition wagons come up from the south on the other side of the river. They're ferried across right away, and they disperse all this ammunition to the cannons just as they're needed. As this occurs, Buford is pushing and pushing, and then here comes Jeb Stuart. Stuart's coming in from Hagerstown, and that's more from the northeast.
Okay.
So Stuart comes in, and he finds himself on the flank of Buford's men. So Buford starts to pull away because he realizes, he can be flanked pretty easily.
It's Fitzhugh that's coming down with Stuart?
Well, Fitz was with the wagon train.
Oh, okay. So are they arriving late then?
They're actually coming from, the battle was in Hagerstown. Stuart was around Funkstown fighting. Okay, and they leave Funkstown. Kilpatrick pulls off, and Stuart is making his way towards Williamsport. Finds his. It may have been Fitz Lee. I'd have to check on that.
Okay. Well, the map is showing Fitzhugh coming down from the north.
Okay. Well, we'll go with that.
Okay, and then Custer coming in on the Hagerstown Pike.
And then, because of the location of the Confederates on the flank, Buford is forced to withdraw.
Right.
Okay, this was what was known as the Wagoners' fight because a lot of these men are teamsters and wagon drivers, filled in, just when needed because they had the ammunition and the ability to do that. Again, these guys, they're troopers. They're veterans, and they understood what was at risk there.
Yeah.
You take Williamsport, you let Williamsport fall, Lee's entire escape route is gone.
So the wagons do all, except for the ones we've already lost, but once they get to Williamsport, all the wagons get across?
Eventually.
Yeah.
And most of them are going to go that way with the rest of the Army coming in. That defensive line expands, and it includes that little, for lack of a better term, peninsula in the river where Falling Waters is.
Okay.
And of course, the pontoon bridge there was destroyed. Was that destroyed on the 1st or the 2nd of July? Look here. Here, I have some notes on the pontoon bridge. So, again, another element of the 1st New York Cavalry made a patrol to try to see where the Confederates crossed the river when they moved north. And they came to this pontoon bridge that was not guarded. They went back to Harper's Ferry, reported to Colonel Andrew McReynolds, who was the commander of the Lincoln Cav, and he gave permission for about 300 troopers from the 1st New York, 1st West Virginia, the 13th and 14th PA Cavalries to make a raid. They're going to arrive on the Maryland side of the river before dawn on the 4th.
Okay.
A couple of men swim across the river because the Confederates had untied or unmoored the pontoon bridge from the Maryland side and let it float down, and it's just along the West Virginia side.
Got it.
Okay, so these
The
men
Confederates did that, or the Yankees did that?
No, the Confederates did
Okay, got
to
it.
protect it. That way they don't have to guard the Maryland side as well.
Okay.
Okay, so these men swim across. They unlash a couple of pontoons, swim them back across to Maryland, where about 40 men or so, Yankees, get on that, go back across the river, very stealthily, very quietly. They climb the riverbank. If you've been to Falling Waters on that side, there's a little waterfall there, so that's making some noise. That's beneficial to the Yankees trying to be quiet. But they come across the Confederate Guard, and most of those are rushed all at one time. Some of them escape. They capture something like 13 or 14 men. They chase them clear back to Williamsport. But while that's going on, the rest of these 300 Yankees that are there are untying that bridge, taking it back across to the Maryland side. It's wet, so it doesn't burn very well, but they took axes and saws and things like that, and they are just hacking it apart.
Okay.
Cutting the pontoons apart. At the same time, the guard camp, the Confederate guard camp on the West Virginia side, has ammunition, small arms, things like that, and wagons. And they're destroying that too, burning it, throwing them into the river to get rid of that. So it was a successful little raid, and by that time they leave. They realize they've done what they can do, and they head back to Harper's Ferry. So that's why that pontoon bridge was destroyed when it was, and why Lee now has to expand that defensive line in order to try to rebuild that.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. So Imboden, going back to Williamsport, Imboden has done what he was asked to do. He has transported these men, most of the men, successfully over these, 35, 40 miles, whatever it was, through these horrible, horrible conditions to Williamsport, where he will eventually get them across the river. The 62nd Mounted Infantry that traveled with him will eventually escort many Yankee prisoners that were under guard of Pickett when Pickett arrives with them. They will escort them back through Virginia to Winchester and on to Stanton. But Imboden essentially did what he was asked to do.
Mm-hmm. So, he succeeded in doing what he had to do.
He did. And I pulled another quote out from Jacob Hoke, and I wanted to really try to end on this.
Okay.
And Hoke says this: "There were, it is true, places and occasions where a greater number of wounded were congregated, as in the Wilderness and at Gettysburg itself before the removal of these men. But as a moving mass of human agony, augmented and intensified by the roughness of the road, the rolling and jolting of the wagons, the darkness of the night, the rain and the mud, and the pursuing Federals, this event stands without parallel upon this continent, if not in all history." So it's just, it's just one of those things that was ingrained in me at a young age.
Sure.
And it's just stuck with me.
Yeah. It's
just
a
the
miserable
suffering,
experience. It's horrible.
The misery, the suffering.
Miles of misery.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, let's do that. Let's not do that. We don't want miles of misery, but let's take a quick break and come back and get to the questions from our patrons about this event. We'll be right back after these words.
The season is finally here. 2021 is going to be a great year, and we know that you're going to come down to Gettysburg. And when you do come down to Gettysburg, you got to take a tour with Getty's Bike Tours. Getty's Bike Tours has been in business since 2005. It is the best way to see the battlefield. Why? Because you don't just see the battlefield, you experience the battlefield. Our tours are led by some of the finest licensed battlefield guides out there, and they make sure that you walk away with a full understanding of what happened here on those 3 days in 1863. Here's the best part. Because you're an Addressing Gettysburg listener, you're going to get 15% off when you make your reservation. Now, this discount only applies to tours, so go to gettysbike.com or call 717-752-7752 and book a tour today. There's no better way to see the town you're visiting than to eat your way through it. And there's no better way to eat your way through this town than with Savor Gettysburg food tours. Enjoy a culinary and cultural experience through historic downtown Gettysburg, one delicious bite at a time. Their season runs from April through November with the special Christmas Tastes and Traditions walking food tour during the month of December. So go to SavorGettysburgFoodTours.com and enter promo code AG2021 to receive $5 off your tour. Eat, walk, get a taste of history with Savor Gettysburg. Have you noticed our revamped website at addressinggettysburg.com? Well, that's the fine work of a man named Mike Stretch, and he also redid our logo for us. Both of them I originally designed, and both of them were originally horrible, but now they're nice, and that's all thanks to Mike. Mike has an awesome t-shirt company called Heritage Depot. There you'll find great designs based on Gettysburg and the Civil War with t-shirts and other types of merchandise. So go to heritage-depot.com and spruce up your Getty's Nerd wardrobe. That's heritage-depot.com. Our favorite bookstore in Gettysburg is For the Historian, located at 42 York Street. It's because they have the best selection of Civil War books in Gettysburg, both new and used. And online, they have even more to choose from. And if the Civil War isn't your thing, that's not a problem. This is For the Historian, after all. They cover history from the ancient world to the 21st century with a strong selection of World War II and American Revolution books. It's astounding how many thousands of titles from Osprey, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more they have in their store. And that's because, well, they have a warehouse too. And that's where they keep all the books that are available online at forthehistorian.com. And folks, if you go to forthehistorian.com now and order books until you're blue in the face, be sure you mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund your shipping costs. And if you prefer to stop by when you're in town, well, you could do that too. Just mention Addressing Gettysburg at checkout, and they'll take 20% off the retail price of your item. So go to forthehistorian.com or stop by 42 York Street, or you can call them at 717-685-5207. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207. Gettysburg, A Nation Divided mobile app is relaunching this summer. Gettysburg, A Nation Divided is an award-winning mixed reality mobile application using augmented reality technology. It transports users into the most crucial moments in the Battle of Gettysburg, the turning point of the Civil War. Users can listen and watch historic figures share their stories as lifelike animated avatars, traverse 360-degree image sequences of the battlefield. Its cinematic battle sequences are narrated by actor Scott Eastwood. The mobile app is available for free on iOS and Android. It's designed to be used anywhere, at home, at school, at the park, or at Gettysburg National Military Park. It uses GPS to help guide you through your journey to see the stories and events unfold at the exact location where they occurred. So go into your phone's app store and get it now for free. That's Gettysburg, A Nation Divided.
Okay, we're back with questions for Tracy, and these questions are submitted by some of our awesome patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. And if you'd like to submit questions for our Ask a Guides for our guides to answer and get exclusive content that takes a closer look at all things Gettysburg and Gettysburg related, then please consider joining us on Patreon today. That's Patreon today, excuse me. That's patreon.com/addressing Gettysburg. Okay, we're going to open up with Brian from Cleveland. He has two questions. The rebels on the retreat and Union prisoners that died, were they buried in marked graves or just left by the road?
Well, the Union prisoners were taken the other route. Okay, they would have been taken up over Monterey Pass, not with Imboden. And we touched on the Confederates a little bit. Some of them were marked. I would say most of them were not.
Yeah.
We talked about some of the servants coming back and claiming the bodies later, so they would have had to have known where they were somewhere.
Right.
I just picture it in my mind, kind of like what Gettysburg's battlefield looked like, with just these shallow graves around the area.
Lumps of dirt.
Yeah.
And those that died on the retreat, rebs and prisoners, were they added to the death toll for Gettysburg?
That is something that I am not sure of.
It's a good question, though.
It is a good question.
Yeah.
I would say, killed outright, no. When we talk about killed outright, it's,
sure.
These are men dying days later.
In other words, you're saying these aren't counted in that number?
Well, I don't know. I'm just saying they weren't.
I would imagine they're not.
Yeah, that's kind of my take on it too. I don't think they're counted in the initial. These men were killed directly as a result. It's added to.
I wonder what was the standard for categorizing casualties? Because I noticed on some monuments they'll put killed, wounded, missing. Another one will be killed, wounded, mortally wounded, missing, or died of wounds or something like that.
Yeah.
So it doesn't seem to me, unless I'm misreading it, that there was a standard for how to count your casualties.
We'll have to send a note to John Batchelder, and ask him.
Yeah. All right. I'll find his email address.
Superintendent of Tablets and Legends.
I mean, there's got to be an answer somewhere.
Yeah.
But, yeah. All right, Debbie Cross. How were Union prisoners of war who were wounded cared for during the wagon ride? And how easy would it have been for Union prisoners to escape in the chaos of the exit back over the Potomac?
Well, again, the Union prisoners went a different route.
Mm-hmm.
I think some of them probably did try to make an escape. I know for a fact some of these Confederates that were captured at Cunningham Crossroads and in the Greencastle area, they escaped. So it stands to reason that Union troops would try to escape as well. As far as how they were treated, I don't know. I followed a little bit of that after they crossed the river back towards Winchester and Stanton, and they really pushed them kind of hard and didn't feed them as well as they probably could have. And that that's both sides. It's
right.
not just the Confederates mistreating. It happened on both sides. Let's be clear about that.
Mm-hmm.
But eventually, they're prisoners of war. They're taken as quickly as they can be to the South, where they will be, in POW camps. So I don't see anything necessarily unusual about how they were treated. I think it was just typical of any battle.
Well, that kind of ties into the next question from Richard Snyder. He asks, were Union POWs enlisted to help with the wounded, or were they kept at a distance during the retreat?
That I've not ever really come across them helping in any way.
Right.
I think you try to keep them separated.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, Joe Jacobs, how many of Lee's wounded wagons were captured on the way back to Virginia? Also, would you really want to capture your enemy's wounded? I don't mean to sound cruel, but wouldn't that lessen their burden and increase yours? Love the show. Thanks, Joe.
Well, again, as I mentioned, I would love to be able to find out how many wagons started and how many wagons ended this trip.
That'd be interesting.
We do not know. We do not know. There's no way to find that out. As far as capturing your wounded, think back to the beginning of the show. Why was Lee trying to save these men? Because it's a limited resource.
Yeah.
So if you take them out, whether they're wounded or not, you're taking that manpower away from your opponent.
Right. Okay. All right.
And they're not, for the most part, they're not really, when they're taken, they're not really in a field hospital like we think about around the battlefield. They're going to be cared for and then sent off to a city where a POW camp is, and other hospitals where they're going to be getting a little better care.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, the big answer there is you're taking them away from the enemy's firepower.
Right. All right. Mark Miller, on average, how many soldiers could be transported in one wagon? Were wagons filled or organized based on the amount of continued care that was needed for each one?
And that depends on the wagon.
Yeah. Because they're not all the same wagons.
The ambulances, Eric, do you know about the ambulances? Couldn't they carry like 12 men seated?
I think it was 8.
Eight men seated, and if somebody is in a prone position, it's fewer.
They could carry 2 on stretchers and up to 8 seated.
Yeah.
But
So
federal wagons.
But those are
federal wagons.
Because
those
the
are
Confederate
federal ambulances. Yeah.
Yeah.
So like if the Confederates captured some federal wagons, they might be a little more comfortable, but they didn't.
And again, it depends on the wagon. They're not all ambulances.
Sure.
So it really depends on the condition of the men, their wounds, and what kind of wagon it was, how many you can fit in there.
In Chambersburg, did they say ambulance or ambulance?
Ambulance.
Ambulance.
We say ambulance.
Okay.
Back
But you
there.
said ambulance, though.
We say ambulance back there.
Backer. All right. Jon Stewart, the great Jon Stewart from The Daily Show, is also a fan of ours. Lee told Stewart that the captured wagons he showed up with were an impediment to him. Didn't these wagons become less essential to Lee's retreat?
Which wagons were they? Stewart's.
The ones when Lee yelled at him.
Oh, what?
I don't have my soundboard up.
Well, they were included. They were included.
You're all lucky.
Yeah, they were included in this wagon train. So they were,
They were part of the deal.
They were part of the deal. Yeah.
All right. John Calcagni, he says, I believe Lee gave John Imboden a letter where he was told to have a trusted courier personally deliver it to Jeff Davis upon returning to Virginia with the wounded wagon train. Was this the request for resignation letter?
And, I all of my sources allude to that letter. And that meeting between Lee and Imboden, the early morning of July 4th, he alludes to that. He says, I'm going to give you a letter, a sealed letter, and it must not fall into Union hands. It must not fall into enemy hands.
Do we know of Davis receiving another letter from that time period from Lee that wasn't the resignation letter?
Here's the curious part of it to me. These resources I've looked into, they mention this letter, but they never follow up with it. So I've heard that it was a resignation letter. I don't know if it was or not. I don't know if Davis received it. If he did, I have an idea he just said, there's no time for that.
Thank you for doing it. My buttons aren't set up. Sitting here with us is Owen from the Civil War Files on Instagram. Jesus. On Instagram. And he just got here. He's a freshman or fresh person or first person year, whatever the hell they're supposed to call him now. Over at Gettysburg College.
A 13th grader.
A 13th grader. That's basically what it is. Welcome to Gettysburg, Owen. Do you have a question about this for Tracy? Come to the microphone. Jesus. Yeah, that one there. Just lift it up. Lift. All right, whatever. Just. Why are these things so confusing for people? All right, go ahead.
So have they found any remains of these soldiers to date that were left on the side of the road, or are they mostly just kind of thrown out there? Wow.
I mean, he's only been here at Gettysburg College for 4 days, and amazing. Great question.
I have not come across anything saying that they found any. Doesn't mean they're not out there, because how many would have been lost? 158 years.
You had to stumble on someone.
With animals and weather and farmers and things like that. How many have
development?
Been destroyed?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Had to find
But I
somebody.
don't know in my lifetime of any being found.
Okay, it looks like he's got a second one here.
Okay, round two. How fast do you think the Confederate Army was going through horses in Pennsylvania, and did they acquire a lot of horses into the march?
They did. How fast? I don't know. It really depends on the horse and how they were being used. Estimates range upwards of 20,000 horses taken by the Confederates while they were in Pennsylvania.
Eric, didn't you have a stat that you read the other day about the horses?
Just the Federal Cavalry Corps went through 35,000 remounts, or were issued 35,000 remounts just during the Gettysburg campaign. So that was basically enough to completely remount the entire command 3.5 times.
That's crazy.
In like a month and a half. So it's got to be just as bad or worse for the Confederate Army.
It's got to be worse.
As it is for the Federal.
God, those poor animals. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this episode of Addressing Gettysburg's Ask a Gettysburg Guide. Thank you for listening. Thank you, Tracy, for coming in and talking about this rarely talked about part of the Gettysburg campaign. And I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And again, if you want to become a patron, you can do that and become a questioner on Ask a Gettysburg Guide. We know Owen's going to do it now that he's here.
2 questions, Owen.
Yeah. Follow-up question, Owen. Somewhat competent Owen, yeah. Well, listen, Owen, good luck in school. I hope you do well. I hope you enjoy it and have fun. And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much. Have a good one.
Are you a reenactor or living historian? Or maybe you're a War of Rights player and want to bring esprit de corps to your team? Well, then you need the Badge Maker, the leading provider of Civil War and other historical badges and insignias. Mention this ad with an attached message in your order and receive a free surprise gift. I myself bought a metal 2nd Corps badge, and it always starts a conversation when I wear it. So hit up the Badge Maker at CivilWarCorpsBadges.com. Something for everyone and anyone.
Instead of spot, we down and pay the reckoning on the net. No man for debt shall go to jail from Gettysburg.